September 24th, 1969, the Royal Albert Hall. A rock band walks out in front of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, and the conductor raises his baton. The conductor is Malcolm Arnold, a decorated British composer, a serious man. And the rock band, of course, is Deep Purple, who, 4 months earlier, had been playing ballrooms and supporting Vanilla Fudge on package tours. And what follows is a full 3-movement concerto composed by John Lord, performed with 50-odd orchestral players in one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. Nobody knew what to do with it. Not the critics, not the audience, not, by most accounts, the bands themselves. Ritchie Blackmore said he thought it was a gimmick, and Ian Gillan said the orchestra was condescending. But the management loved it because it was a press angle, which he resented. John Lord was happy, and management was ecstatic. The album went to number 26 in the UK. In America, it barely registered. And within a year, Deep Purple had pivoted so hard toward heavy rock that the concerto was practically retroactively disowned. In Rock came out in 1970 and blew up the whole bridge. So why does it matter now, in 2026, when Deep Purple announces a one-off show at the Royal Albert Hall this November 25th? Because the Royal Albert Hall is not a neutral venue for this band. Every time they've returned to it, something significant was happening. And the fact that they're going back again is worth thinking about carefully. If you haven't spent time with the concerto for Group and Orchestra, it helps to understand what it was and wasn't. The concerto was John Lord's composition, conceived in part while Mark I lineup was still active, before Gillan and Glover had joined the band. By the time September rolled around, the Mark II lineup had been together for only a matter of months. What we hear on this recording is a brand new unit performing a piece whose architecture predates them, and doing so in one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. The concerto is structurally a classical work for rock instruments and orchestra. 3 movements. John Lord's organ does most of the architectural heavy lifting. Blackmore plays, not as reluctant as he claimed later, if you actually listen, but within constraints that aren't typical Purple constraints. Gillan is present, but not dominant in the way he would become. What the recording captures more than anything is a band in a transitional state, being asked to perform at a level of prestige they hadn't fully even earned yet. The orchestra, by multiple accounts, was not exactly warm towards the rock group sharing their stage. The dress code, the venue, the critical context, all of it was pointing in one direction, and Deep Purple were the oddity in the room. The fact that it was also the London premiere of Malcolm Arnold's own Symphony No. 6 tells you something about how the evening was positioned. Yes, Deep Purple were the supporting act to a serious composer's new work, even in their own headline show. Arnold, to his credit, was generous afterward. He said, "What strikes me about Deep Purple is a tremendous musical integrity. I loved working with them. They're thorough musicians." That quote tends to get quoted warmly in Deep Purple histories, but it is worth noticing what he was actually saying. They surprised him. He didn't expect them to be musicians worth taking seriously. The concerto matters not because it's the best work, it probably isn't, and not because it launched them into classical respectability. It didn't. It matters because it was a moment when the band was forced into a context larger than themselves, and the result was genuinely strange and genuinely ambitious. That combination is hard to replicate. The concerto is the obvious reason, but it's not the only reason the Royal Albert Hall holds meaning for this band. They were back in January 1970, supporting Canned Heat, which tells you something about where they were in the pecking order, even in the months after Concerto. They headlined the Royal Albert Hall in 1971 on the Fireball Tour. Then, 1999, 30 years after the original performance, with a score that had been reconstructed from scratch because the original had been lost, and staged the same concerto again over 2 nights with the London Symphony Orchestra this time. That lineup was Gillan, Glover, Lord, Pace, and Steve Morse on guitar, with guest vocalists including Ronnie James Dio. 2 different guitar players, 2 different orchestras, 3 decades apart. And then, in 2014, the celebration of John Lord on April 4th, held at the Royal Albert Hall after Lord's death in July 2012. The band performing in a room that had, up to that point, been specifically associated with Lord's greatest compositional ambition. Each of those returns carried a different change. 1999 was a deliberate anniversary event, a celebration of continuity. 2014 was a memorial. And 2026 is being built as neither, just a full-throttle rock show, a one-off performance. The 100th London show, according to some estimates. But the venue won't let that framing sit uncomplicated. There is no way to stand on that stage as Deep Purple and not be in conversation with what happened there in September 1969. The room remembers, even when the press release doesn't. The show announcement came on February 3rd this year from the official Deep Purple site. November 25th, 2026. One night. The show follows the night after the Apollo in Hammersmith, which is itself a significant London venue, but it's an arena, not a landmark. The Royal Albert Hall date is clearly positioned as the special one. The tour itself is enormous, spanning Asia, Europe, North America, and then the UK leg closing with the Royal Albert Hall. What's worth noting is what the announcement does not say. There is no mention of an orchestral component. There is no concerto framing in the official copy. The announcement references 1969, specifically describing it as the first time a rock group premiered a full classical composition with an orchestra at the Hall, but immediately pivots to talking about the band's power in the present tense. That pivot is intentional, and it's probably the right call. Doing the concerto again without John Lord and without the original architect of the piece would raise questions the band cannot comfortably answer. Lord died in 2012, and no one is going to pretend otherwise. What Don Airey has done for 24 years is something more honest than imitation. He has performed Lord's work with a fidelity that comes from a genuine reverence. His philosophy, by his own account, has always been simple. Why the hell would he change it? That custodianship matters. The 2026 show doesn't attempt to resurrect 1969. So this is something else. It's a rock show in a room with a specific history by a band that is continuous with and entirely different from the one that stood there 57 years ago. The current Deep Purple is Ian Gillan, Roger Glover, Ian Pace, Don Airey, and Simon McBride. 3 of the 5 were on the stage that night, and McBride wasn't even born yet. He joined in 2022 after Steve Morse left to care for his wife, who is battling cancer. The Equals One album, released July 2024, was the first studio record with McBride's input, and it's a seriously great album. It's not a band going through the motions. It got great reviews, it charted in multiple countries, and the band toured 75 shows behind it in 2024. Gillan described the band as hard and mean and hungry in a late 2025 interview. He also said that retirement is not too far off, and the Royal Albert Hall sits towards the end of what is, by any measure, an ambitious phase. There's a new album due this June. Gillan described it as the end of humanity, but not as grim as it sounds. A loose conceptual idea about the metamorphosis of humanity into a metaphysical state. It will be part of the context in which this show happens. What McBride needs to prove at the Royal Albert Hall is a bit harder question. I mean, he's been delivering live. The Equals One material confirms it. His solos, combining blues and shred in a way reviewers have called genuinely refreshing. But McBride at the Royal Albert Hall is McBride in a room where Blackmore made the concerto work against his own resistance, The pressure isn't on McBride's ability. It's on whether his vision of this band can occupy a space that carries as much weight without sinking inside of it. Here's what I think the Royal Albert Hall show on November 25th actually is. It's not a nostalgia exercise. The band has been explicit that it isn't. And the 1969 connection, while real and worth understanding, is not what makes this show significant in itself. What makes it significant is that it happens at this particular moment in the band's history. Deep Purple in 2026 is a band that has survived every reasonable expectation of longevity, survived more lineup changes than most bands survive albums, and is currently operating credibly, actively, with two members who weren't there for any version of the classic era. And the Royal Albert Hall is the venue where they were first taken seriously as something more than a rock band, where John Lord's ambition, his genuine compositional ambition, was presented to the world in the most prestigious room available, where Malcolm Arnold said they had musical integrity and meant it as a surprise. Playing that room now in 2026 is an implicit statement. The band has earned the right to be here, not because of 1969, because of everything that came after it and the fact that they're still here. Whether the show delivers on that, well, that depends on what they play and how they play and sing it. But the announcement alone is a provocation. Deep Purple in their late career in a venue tied to their most serious artistic moment. This is worth paying attention to. Now, whether this show gets filmed and properly released is a question the fan base is already asking. I really think it should.